Hello, geeks, freaks, and all those unique. This is EmceeFrodis. So, all of the shows that I've been reviewing are over for the season, and I haven't written any new essays lately. So, I haven't had a lot to post lately. But I thought I'd give everybody some entertainment because I haven't done a fanfic reading for a while. So, here this is for your enjoyment. So, the fic I am reading today is another Star Trek alternate universe fic. It's set after Star Trek '09, like kind of during it, but towards the very end. And this story is called Crew Morale. Jim slid through the door, the excitement still thrumming through his body. Even after a medical exam, mandated rest, and his debriefing by Starfleet, he couldn't calm himself down from the thrill of his fight with the Narada. He sidled up to the bar, to the pretty woman now in her civvies. He held up 2 fingers to the bartender. 2 shots of Jack. He turned to the woman and smiled widely. This one's on me, and it's not because I want to know your name, because I know it. Uhura looked at him askance. She accepted the drink offered to her and downed it in one gulp. Congratulations! You stopped staring at my breasts long enough to notice someone use my name. Well, that's unfair, Jim mock-pouted. I've always been much more interested in your legs. I mean, look at them. They go all the way to the floor. Uhura waved him off. I'm really not interested in doing this, Kirk. Hey, that's Captain Kirk, he corrected her. They're not going to announce it until the commendation ceremony, but they're letting me keep the Enterprise. And I want you on my bridge, Lieutenant. So any charm you feel coming your way is just my natural charisma and not any attempt at anything. Besides, I'm not looking to get at the wrong end of another one of Spock's ass-kickings. Uhura went quiet and turned back to the bar. Jim leaned in towards her. So he's the reason you've been turning me down for 3 years? Her dark gaze fixed on him. There were a lot of reasons to turn you down. Jim actually laughed. Sure, he didn't like that Uhura had no interest in him, but now that he was in command of the Enterprise, it was for the best. He couldn't mess around with his crew. Even he knew that was a bad idea. So what are you two anyway? Because what I saw in the transporter wasn't a, oh my god, you're gonna die, so let me admit my feelings to you kiss. You two have done that before. A lot. Uhura ordered another drink. I don't think that's any of your business, Captain. Jim laughed. You sound like him. I have no comment on the matter. He deepened his voice, imitating Spock's monotone. He also wanted me to tell you he loved you, in case he died. Uhura blinked, her back straightening. He said that to you? Jim shook his head. He didn't say the actual words. I cut him off. Let him know it was going to work. But a man knows these things. You two are like together. Uhura huffed out an annoyed breath. If you're going to get him in trouble for dating a student, I had finished his class before anything started. I'm the one who asked him out. Whoa, whoa! Jim held up his hands in surrender. I wasn't going to do anything like that. Wait, you actually took his class? I didn't know that. That dirty dog. Uhura finished her second shot and shook her head. I really don't want to talk about this. She started to head towards the door. Jim frowned, running after her. Hey, Uhura! He caught hold of her wrist to stop her just outside the door. Come on, I was just teasing. I didn't think you'd be the type who'd be hot for teacher. But really, you two make sense. Okay, so you two are kind of private. Captain, he's leaving. This stopped Jim cold. He released Uhura's wrist. What? Uhura's expression was full of despair. He's leaving Starfleet. He's leaving me. He's going to go help found a new colony for the Vulcan refugees. Jim shook his head. He couldn't believe it. After everything he'd seen from the older Spock, after everything the older Spock had told him, just working side by side with Spock, Jim couldn't imagine him not being there. I hadn't heard about this. He hasn't said anything yet, Uhura sighed. She hugged herself. But I've known him long enough to know what he'll think is the logical path for him. He's gonna want to help his people. And maybe that's the right thing for him to do, but... From the expression on her face, Jim could tell just how much she truly cared for Spock. He put a comforting hand on his shoulder. Maybe you two should talk about it. I mean, I know he's not really into emotions, but he seems to think they're okay with you. Uhura shook her head. I'm not really looking forward to hearing. Our time together has been most agreeable, Nyota, but now I must dedicate myself to rebuilding my civilization by bonding with a beautiful and logical Vulcaness to bear my children. Jim shook his head. I don't know if he'll do that. I mean, he loves you. And that doesn't seem like an easy thing for him to admit. I think he'd only say that if he really, really meant it. Uhura put her hand on top of Jim's, as if she needed a bit of extra support. Love isn't logical, and if he's going to feel like he has to make the logical choice... Jim shook his head again. It's not logical for him to let go of the best thing that's ever happened to him. He slid his arm around her shoulders. Come on, Lieutenant. I'm going to do my part to take care of my crew. Despite Uhura's protests, Jim insisted on walking her to Spock's apartment. She had had a few drinks, and he didn't want her walking on her own. Spock answered his door, wearing only a pair of sleeping pants. He seemed relieved at the sight of Uhura. Nyota? I'd hoped you'd come. Only then did he seem to notice that Jim was there. Captain? What are you doing here? Jim cocked his head as he looked at Spock's chest. He was drawn to what looked to be 3 words in Vulcan low on his torso. Spock, you have a tattoo? Spock's brow rose, and he turned without a word. Jim could see he was wrong in his observation. Spock actually had 2 tattoos. The Idic symbol was located on his left bicep. Spock walked back into his apartment. Why are both of you here? You didn't answer my question, Jim protested. Spock turned back and tilted his head. I do not believe you came here at 0100 to discuss any minor acts of rebellion I may have experimented with. Spock approached Uhura. He reached out to her with 2 fingers, brushing them against her hand. Nyota, what's going on? Uhura opened her mouth to speak, but shook her head. She started to head towards the door. Jim grabbed a hold of her and pulled her back into the apartment. I was just making sure the lieutenant got here all right, Jim said. But I do want to talk to you. You're leaving Starfleet? Spock's eyebrow rose again. I have not yet tendered my resignation, but this is the logical choice for me. The Vulcan refugees will need assistance. Jim felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He didn't want to go on without Spock. But Spock didn't seem to notice how this pronouncement hurt him. He was focused on Uhura. He reached out, taking hold of her hands. This is what is distressing you, Nyota? She nodded, still not speaking. Spock pressed his forehead to hers. Nyota, we were aware that our careers might put us on different assignments. I had believed we were prepared that we might need to separate for long periods of time. Uhura pulled back. You're not breaking up with me? Spock shook his head. He brought his hands up to cup her face. Why would I do that? Jim thought he should leave, but he didn't know if there was an elegant way for him to slip out of the apartment. Maybe they wouldn't even notice. They both seemed entirely focused on one another. Uhura's hands covered Spock's. You're going to rebuild the Vulcan species. Don't you want to bond with a Vulcan? Spock shook his head. It will be some time before the Vulcans establish any sort of birthing program. A colony will have to be established, a census taken. Besides, my genetic material will be considered inferior, and I will be unable to produce without medical intervention. As a breeding prospect, I will be considered more trouble than I am worth. He trailed off, gazing down at her. He took a hold of Uhura's hand, moving it down to press against the tattoo low on his torso. And I thought I made it abundantly clear what's close to my heart. Jim blinked in surprise, suddenly understanding. It's Uhura's name? Spock looked up, finally acknowledging Jim's presence. My dermal art is a permanent reminder of what is most important to me. He looked back to Uhura, and it is not something I am willing to replace with some random Vulcan. He kissed Uhura on the forehead before he turned his attention fully to Jim. I would have liked to remain on the Enterprise, but you have your choice of the best candidates Starfleet has to offer to fill my position. Jim shook his head. I won't have who I want. Spock nodded. Unfortunately, this is the way it must be. I would never ask Nyota to give up her career to follow me. You'll be asking her to serve as your head of communications, I assume? Yeah. Jim looked at the girl, who still looked mournful. Spock looked back at Uhura, reaching out a hand to her with 2 fingers, as he had done before. You will take care of her while I am separated from her, yes? Jim nodded. Of course. I just wish you were going to be there. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, Spock replied. Nodding again, Jim's heart felt heavy. He knew he wasn't going to be able to talk Spock out of his decision. He turned to the door. I should leave you 2 alone. You have a good night. And Spock? He raised his hand, trying to separate his fingers. Finally, he used the other hand to do the Vulcan salute properly. Live long and prosper. Spock returned the gesture. Peace and long life, Captain. The Enterprise was making preparations to head out of space dock. Jim was about to head to the bridge when he saw Uhura striding ahead of him. Lieutenant, are you okay? Uhura nodded stoically. Of course, Captain. Jim put a hand on her shoulder. If you ever need to talk to me, I'm around. She actually managed a small smile. Thank you, Captain. He clapped her on the shoulder playfully. You can tell me about any other tattoos I can't see. Uhura snorted out a laugh. Yeah, that's not going to happen. With that, she moved quickly towards the bridge. Wait, does he have more? Jim called out after her. He sighed deeply. He hadn't yet replaced Spock on the roster. As difficult as he found the guy, Jim just couldn't bring himself to replace him. It was going to be strange going out into space without him, knowing what he did of their friendship in the other timeline. He shook his head. He couldn't dwell on the loss of Spock. He walked towards the bridge. Uhura was already at her station. Dock control reports ready, Captain. Jim looked around at his crew. He walked up to his best friend and chief medical officer. Bones, buckle up. Jim sat down in his chair, preparing himself to leave space dock. But before Sulu could engage the thrusters, the door to the turbolift opened. Spock stepped out. Permission to come aboard, Captain. He was in his full uniform. That was all Kirk needed to know, that Spock had changed his mind. Permission granted. Once Alpha Shift was over, Jim rose from his chair. He walked to the science station and clapped Spock on the back. You're relieved, Commander. Spock stood up straight. Captain, I presume you have no plans to leave the bridge as of yet? Just got the ship out of space dock. I'm not looking to hand over the reins to someone else just yet. Spock tilted his head. If you are planning to work a double, I should remain with you. Jim shook his head. Nah, I can handle things on my own. Besides, he jerked his head towards Uhura, who was rising from her own station. She's been holding herself back since the moment you got on the bridge. You really gonna make her wait any longer? Spock watched Uhura head towards the turbolift. He gave a quick nod to Jim before following after her. Jim smiled and went back to his chair. He glanced over at the turbolift. Just as the doors were closing, he could see Uhura throwing herself into Spock's arms. Spock wrapped his arms around her and lifted her up to meet his lips. He supposed it was a captain's duty to keep crew morale up. So, yeah, that's crew morale. Which probably the most controversial thing in the story is tattooed Spock, which there is an explanation for. This story is part of the Half Vulcan Way of Life series, which has several stories in it. And a story that takes place before that is one that I'm working on right now, which is called A Better Daughter or Son. And in that one, you find out, or you see Spock get his tattoos. And long story short, Spock goes through a rebellious period in his first year as a cadet. And I know that sounds confusing, like why does it have Uhura's name if it was during his first year as a cadet? His tattoo actually has 3 names on it. It's Amanda, Michael, and then later on he had Nyota added to it. He did that once he kind of realized that Uhura was going to be the woman that he was going to be with. So yeah, that's my explanation for weird Spock with tattoos. But it was actually worse in his first year. He had piercings at one point. He actually still has a piercing. It's just not anywhere that you can see it. I'm sorry. I like Spock being a little bit of a rebel, and there was actually a logical reason for it. Yeah, this is a series that I've been working on for a while. About a year now at this point. And there's several stories that take place between the movies that kind of explain things. I actually was calling them like my stories to explain Spock's reasoning throughout things, because so many of the movies had Spock do really stupid things. I still haven't done one for Into Darkness because I haven't figured out how to explain the stupid in that. Sorry, I mean, I'm fonder of Into Darkness than a lot of people are, but I still think it's dumb. So I need some time before I can justify it. But I never liked the whole idea of Spock going off to make babies on New Vulcan, because it doesn't make any sense, because literally nobody would want Spock doing that. So I always had the explanation that, yes, he's going to help rebuild Vulcan, but not rebuild the Vulcan species. And I also don't think that Spock would have gotten into a relationship with Uhura if he didn't intend for it to be like a long-term thing. And there is a story that explains the breakup and beyond. But the two big stories in this series are the one I mentioned before, Better Daughter or Son, which is still ongoing. I think I'm on chapter like 25, and Spock is an ensign right now. I actually, the last chapter that I posted just had Kirk up here. Obviously, Spock and Kirk didn't meet, but Uhura met Kirk. And that story is about Spock and Michael growing up together, because I did kind of bring Michael into the Kelvinverse, because why not? She actually kind of works really well in the Kelvinverse, which is funny because I know so many people are like, Discovery's in the Kelvinverse, and I'm one of the people who's like, no, it's in the Prime Universe, just admit it. But I think having Michael as Spock's sister in the Kelvinverse works really well. As a part of this story, their relationship is slightly different. They don't have that years-long falling out that happens in the regular canon, or the Prime canon, I should say. And the whole reason I did that is because obviously we can see that Kelvinverse Spock is a lot more in touch with his emotions. He's a lot more open to relationships with people. And I have kind of attributed that to him having a much better relationship with Michael, because we are told in season 2 of Discovery that rift between him and Michael is what caused Spock to really give in to the whole logic thing. So basically, Michael is kind of responsible for Spuhura, which makes Michael okay by me. And maybe eventually I'll read some parts of that story, but it is incredibly long, so I couldn't do it in one shot. I actually think one chapter of that might be like longer than even that story that I just read. And then there are some other ones. I also did a Ponfar story, Fever, When You Kiss Me, which that was the first story in the series, actually, which is set after Beyond. And that's when I introduced that Michael is around. And obviously, unsurprisingly, since it's a Ponfar story, it's where Spock and Uhura get married. Spoilers much for my series. But yeah, I really like writing my Kelvinverse fic. I have done some small things for the original series, but the Kelvinverse, there's just so many places that I can go because they haven't made a lot of movies. So I really quite enjoy being able to fill in my own gaps. So that's about it for today. I'll be back soon with more reviews and essays and stuff, and possibly some more fanfic. So if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel, leave comments about what you think of my fic, if you'd like to see me do more fic readings. If you want to support me, you can go to my Patreon or buy me a coffee, or you can buy a t-shirt at TeePublic or Redbubble. Today I'm wearing my Fanfic Tropes shirt, which is appropriate for this reading. And until next time, live long and may the force be with you.